Hvordan skaper vi klimapolitikk med global effekt? For å diskutere dette temaet ønsker vi Vidar Helgesen, Brian Deese, Monica Araya og Marius Holm velkommen opp på scenen. For å lede debatten, ta vel imot Dagbladet-kommentator Geir Ramnefjell.
Okay, we're going to have a conversation about climate policy with global effect with these competent people. And so let's just start off with you, Marius. What does it exactly mean, if you can say it shortly, climate policy with global effect?
Well, last year at this conference, I launched the term Trump-proof climate policy. And what I meant by that is when we develop technology and develop the market so technology become competitive, that's a force that expands way beyond the borders of this country. So if, for instance, electrical ferries seems to be completely superior to diesel ferries because we developed it and developed the market. And I would like to see any climate denialist who would say no thanks to competitive solutions.
Mr. Brian Deese, you have stressed the importance to connect climate change to people's everyday life in order to make voters alert to the problem. How do you connect green growth to everyday life?
Well, I think it starts with a couple of things. The first is recognizing and indeed encouraging everybody to identify why it is that they connect to this issue. I thought that Marius's presentation about his cabin was an apt way to start, because I think we too infrequently go immediately in forums like this to macroeconomics and trends and otherwise, without recognizing that at its core, the question of sustainable growth and green growth is about how we want to live our lives, how we want to raise our children, the communities that we want to live in. For me, it's a lot about my kids. I have a daughter who's almost 5 and a son who's almost 2. He was born 2 weeks before we left for Paris to negotiate the climate agreement. And every day that I spent in Paris was a day that I wasn't with him, but was a day that I was thinking about his future. I think the way that we connect this increasingly is by making real the economic opportunity that we talk about. It's easy for us to say that a green growth strategy is a pro-growth strategy, but we have to be more intentional about connecting that to what that means for people in their everyday lives. And I'll give you just one example in the United States. There's a lot of conversation about jobs in the wind industry and the solar industry and how those compare to coal jobs in the United States. And it is true that wind jobs and solar jobs in the United States are growing roughly 10 times faster than the economy as a whole. That's important and that's significant. But what's missing is the fact that the sector of energy efficiency represents 4 million jobs in the United States. 5-6 times the people that are employed in solar and wind. Those are jobs outside of the coasts. In middle America, people with pickup trucks who are installing insulation, installing windows. Those are people whose lives and livelihoods are being changed because it's getting increasingly cheaper and more efficient for people to stop wasting energy. It's an extraordinary story and it's changing people's lives. We have to do a better job connecting that to the large macro trends that we all understand and we understand are driving this transition.
You were talking about how the Trump administration is now rolling back the policies that you spent years setting in place. How does that feel?
Well,
like a waste of time?
No, not at all. I will say that the rhetorical posture of the current administration is, first and foremost, as from an American perspective, I think is embarrassing. That it's not where the rest of the world is, and ultimately, America is going to lose as other countries move forward and reap the benefits of being the clean energy superpowers of the 21st century. But no, not at all in the sense that, again, below the rhetoric, what's happening is less a rolling back and more a bumbling along. And the truth is that in the United States, if you talk to business leaders, people who are operating businesses, whether in the utility sector or the transportation sector or otherwise, they're making their investment decisions with 5, 10, 15-year time horizons. The uncertainty that is created in the current environment is not good for business, but they're looking beyond the immediate headlines of the day and ask the question, where's the economy of the future going? And the answer is everything is going to become electrified, and increasingly those people who don't focus on efficiencies are going to be leaving money on the table. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of the reason why that's the case and why the market is driving that change is because of decisions that policymakers in the United States and elsewhere made over the past decade. So not a waste of time, but certainly a new constructive challenge for us all to work through.
So you're saying that the pace of the rolling back isn't too worrying, but isn't the US missing out on important steps towards this emission-free world, and isn't the world as a consequence as well losing time?
Absolutely. I don't want to sugarcoat. On the one hand, I think it's important to recognize that that the rhetorical posture of everything being rolled back is not actually the reality of today. On the other hand, it is absolutely the case that the current US leadership puts the United States in a position where we are losing out, and the absence of US leadership on the international stage is a setback at a moment where the world can't really afford losing time. And so the best that we can do is recognize that within the United States, there continue to be leaders on this issue, and that those leaders have significant economic and political power behind them, starting with the big states like California and New York, but not to mention the private sector, where our major companies from the transportation sector to the retail sector to the financial sector are stepping up and saying, we recognize that in the current environment, we need to do more. And everybody here and elsewhere should be holding those folks to account.
And moving from a big country to small countries, Costa Rica and Norway, how can a small country like Norway and Costa Rica make a difference? What benefits do we have as a small nation? Monica, Araya.
Well, it is very important for us to do this because it's good for us in the first place. So, for example, you can come to a point in Costa Rica when some people, not the majority, but some people will say, what's the point of reducing emissions if it's not going to make a difference in the global scheme of things? That's not the point. We have to reduce emissions because they come from transportation, and our transportation is dirty and is hurting our lungs, is hurting kids. It's not good for a country promoting tourism to have dirty transportation in the first place. So what we have done in the organization that I founded, Costa Rica Limpia, which is Clean Costa Rica, is to turn it around and we say, we have to do this because this is development worth having, or in the case of Norway, having EVs. Why would you prefer the dirty internal combustion engine when you can have cleaner cars with no emissions? So we turn it around in Costa Rica and we say, in our case, if you were Costa Ricans, we talk a lot about the country we want, what makes you happy, what makes you proud of being Costa Rican, and then we build a very strong case around being clean, being proud of it, being pura vida, and then we say, oh, by the way, we also have to meet the Paris targets because we are serious countries and we have to deliver on what we promise. So if we clean up our transportation system, we will also meet the Paris Agreement. And by the way, when it comes to the assessment of the targets, only 5 countries, according to Climate Policy Tracker, have adequate Paris targets, and Costa Rica is one of the 5.
Yes.
So
what's the trick? How do you do it?
Well, the thing, going back to the moratorium on oil, you know, I was very young when that moratorium was put in place. There was unfortunately, it was an American company that was trying to I don't want you to feel that, but it was you know, a big company saying we want to do oil exploration in Costa Rica, and there was this consensus that that was not the way for us. And I remember talking to the Minister of Environment at the time, and he said to me, I was very young, and I asked him, you know, are we gonna do it? And then he said, no, over my dead body. and I think for me it was very, very good to see that kind of clarity. So I'm not saying that that is the same case for Norway, because as I said, I want to be very respectful with you, because I know you're trying really hard to do oil exploration responsibly, and it creates jobs, and I know that this is a difficult conversation, but in the case of Norway, I think it's more a matter of risk, and I think Zero has been very proactive and Brian mentioned this also in the intervention. There is something about stranded assets, risks, something about where the markets are going, that in the case of Norway, I would suggest that you also think about where you want to be in 10 years, and what is the biggest risk that you will have if you put a lot of liability into your industries?
Let's push that question forward to you, Mr. Vidar Helgesen. Where will Norway be in 10 years when it comes to this global clean growth?
Well, in 10 years, we'll be around, probably, what many analysts say is peak demand for oil and gas, which means that the perspective that you take for Norway's biggest economic sector will be, I mean, it's only a 20, 30, 40-year perspective on investments, and there will be increasing risk. And that's why we have recently established, as the first country, a government commission to assess Norway's climate risk. Because we need to have a better foundation for that discussion. At the same time, we need to see the opportunities. There are opportunities in the fact that we have very strong clusters in energy, oil and gas, also linked to the maritime clusters, that are increasingly going green. I mean, there are many suppliers that, through the oil price crash that we've had recently, have ventured into new areas. We're seeing Statoil making significant strides into new energy solutions. And for Norway, as a country, it's a huge asset for us if we can bring the institutional strength, the capital, the technology, the know-how of oil and gas and related sectors with us in the green shift. And that's why I'm opposed to entertaining thoughts of halting oil and gas now, but we need to be aware that demand is going to decline. We need to be aware that risk is going to increase, and we need to manage that transition or that transformation. Norway has been incredibly successful in managing the rise of oil and gas. Our objective must be to be as successful in managing the decline when that comes.
Mr. Brian Deese, how can Norway combine this role, being both a driving force of international climate negotiation and at the same time being a large oil exporter and now drilling in the Arctic frontier, as you know? The last thing the Obama administration did was banning oil drilling from large areas of the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. What should Norway do?
Well, one thing I've learned in international diplomatic negotiations is the one question you don't ask is what other countries tell other countries what they should do. Look, I think it's a very important step what the government is doing, which is to start with a systematic and really serious look at what the risks are. Because at the end of the day, a decision about exploration in the fossil sector needs to be driven by a full understanding of the risks and the opportunities but a fair assessment of the price and the costs of those, taking into account all of the externalities and all the subsidies. When it comes to the United States, what we recognized, our Arctic is different, and so you can't draw direct comparisons between what happens in the Norwegian Arctic and in the American Arctic. But what we recognized was that when you actually pull away the government subsidies and when you internalize the costs from additional exploration, that the only plausible scenarios whereby it was economically efficient to expand exploration in the American Arctic were ones where the production occurred on a 15 to 25-year time horizon. And that 15 to 25-year time horizon collides exactly with where we as a global community have now committed that we're going to be in the final stages of decarbonization heading toward 2050.
It's the same thing with Norway, but anyway.
So I think in all seriousness, I think that part of the opportunity for the government today is to ask hard questions about if you take away government incentives and if you fully price in the risks and externalities, what's the answer? And hopefully the commission that's set up will have an opportunity to answer those. And one thing I'll just say as an aside, we in the United States have a lot of work to do on this front, but all countries should do. One thing that we shouldn't be doing at this moment of extreme transition, where we know there will be disruptive change in the fossil sector, is affirmatively subsidizing exploration and production of fossil fuels, whether it be oil, natural gas, or coal. That's a very dangerous policy. In the United States has a lot of work to do on this front. That's a very dangerous policy because it artificially encourages more activity and creates an enhanced risk of stranded assets going forward.
I think that's a perfect ending to this. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Mine damer og herrer, nå er det tid for et kort avbrekk. Velkommen tilbake etter pausen.